look at that little red field apple.
I got the grass, like I told you, from Dave Shearer, the science, and he said, I've never had an apple variety that grew as many apples consistently as a red field. He said they just, every year they set a heavy crop.
Hello, my name is Rio Windcaller, and I am the producer and cider MC of this weekly podcast, where we speak with makers, cider enthusiasts, and folks within the cider trade from around the world.
Hip, hip, hooray!
Bringing us into this year, episode 364, you heard myself and Colin Scott of E.J. Scott Orchard discussing the apple variety known as Redfield. We're going to be rolling out a full-length conversation with Colin. This was actually a episode that I posted in season 2 of Cider Chat. So we're looking at, what year was that? 2016, 2017? So it was a while ago. And I think it's a perfect timing because it's all about orchard care, talking about different varieties that you could graft to, everything that we need as a refresher for this time of year when we're getting back on the orchard and gearing up again. And it's always a pleasure speaking with this guy because he grew up in the orchard. He was taught by his father. And because he's been doing this craft of orchard care and grafting, all the parts that go along with grafting different apple varieties onto rootstock or an apple tree, he knows it so well that you can listen to this episode and have a really good understanding by the end of what it's all about and get fantastic tips for your own orchard in this time of year. So I need a refresher, and I imagine a lot of folks do too. And it's just nice to just sit down with somebody who's just full on in it and has this really nice long view of being in the orchard. So beginning to that featured conversation with Colin Scott coming up. But first, I have a wee bit of news from out and about in Ciderville. I have a really cool event that's taking place on April 29th that I want to tell you about. So this would be for anyone who is in the Hudson River Valley, New York City area, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New England. Make your way down to Stone Ridge Orchard. It's on the west side of the Hudson River. And Stone Ridge is part of the Hudson Valley Farmhouse Cider brand, right? So that's Elizabeth Ryan, who you may have heard many times on this podcast, really like one of those queen bees in the cider and apple community. She was just on the panel. She was really behind the panel all about New York terroir and the cider and specific apple varieties. So this orchard that Elizabeth runs and has a cidery production site there and a really old oak tree, they are hosting this event called a Wassail and Balkan Dance Party. So you know it's going to be a total hoot. It takes place April 29th from 2 to 9 p.m. I'll have a link in the show notes, or go to the Facebook page for Stone Ridge Orchard and press the little link for that event and sign up. It's going to be a blast. This next event is going to require a little hop over the puddle. So let's say you're at the Wassail and Balkan Dance Party on April 29th. You catch a flight out of JFK in New York and land in Bristol, England, to attend the Big Apple, which takes place April 30th and May 1st. Check out their Facebook page. It's called The Big Apple. And maybe you're like really busy doing all your grafting and stuff and you can't attend a lot of events right now. I get it. But that doesn't mean that you can't attend Cider Summit in Portland. That's taking place June 23rd and 24th. Cider Summits take place all on the West Coast, and as far as Chicago, this is hosted by Alan Shapiro. Again, check out the Facebook page. This is just going to be another fun event. They do it so well. The whole team that works for Cider Summit, June 23rd and 24th in Portland. Cider Chat is listener-supported podcasting, meaning all the folks out there in Ciderville, like you listening right now, Help keep this podcast on the air by hitting the donate button at ciderchat.com or becoming a patron at the Cider Chat Patreon page. We also have businesses that underwrite this podcast, and one of them is Fermentis, who has been an active underwriter for Cider Chat for a number of years right now. So up next, let's hear about one of their 4 sap cider yeast that you can start thinking about using for your next cider fermentation. Sweet, crisp, fresh, or balanced, whatever the cider you want to make, you will find the right yeast for your favorite cider in the Sap Cider range by Fermentis. This week, let's discover AB1 Sap Cider. AB1 stands for Apple Balanced. This yeast is the right choice for balanced cider. It ensures a very good assimilation of fructose and excellent for low-gravity ciders, which results in a delicate aroma profile combining fresh and elaborate fruit notes with a balanced mouthfeel respecting cider structure. Sap Cider AB1 will suit for all types of balanced ciders, even under difficult fermentation conditions. Want to explore diversity of cider profiles? Discover it through the selection of yeast strains visiting their website, fermentis.com. That's spelled fermetis.com. Up next is our featured conversation with Colin Scott. We begin by speaking about storage of apples and how that is done at E.J. Scott Orchard. We'll be in the storage rooms, and then we'll have a sit-down talk about grafting and rootstock and fire blight, the whole 9 yards. So this is a very good time to grab a glass and join this chat with Colin Scott of E.J. Scott Orchard in Buckland, Massachusetts.
We have, it's actually 20,000 bushel capacity.
20,000 bushels,
3
wow.
separate rooms, all refrigerated. Each of these rooms hold right around 4,000 bushel apiece. 8,000 bushel apiece. The back room is 4,000. So it's 20 if we jam it full. But we like to have a little elbow room, so probably 17 is easier on us.
Wow. So I just want to let the folks in Ciderville know where we're standing right now. Colin and I are in this, it's like a concrete box, essentially.
Actually, that's what it is. Yeah, it's cinder block walls.
Okay.
It's got sprayed on urethane insulation. It's 2 inches on the outside wall and 1 inch on the inside. It's got an R value of 17.
Wow.
And the other room over here.
Hang on a second, though. What is the dimension of this room?
Oh, I don't even know.
Well, I'm looking at those. What are those? Those apple.
15 bushel bins right there.
And you could stack them
7 high.
7 high.
Yeah, 7 high, and they'll go. I've got to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 wide.
Okay.
And they're probably when we get done, if it's full, it's right to the door here.
Wow! Holy cazzoli.
We've had years, bumper crop around where all 3 rooms are just packed right to the door.
Now, I'm going to guesstimate that height-wise, we're looking at 25 feet?
I would say close to it, yeah.
Okay, and then width-rise is about 30?
Yeah, 30, probably closer to 40.
30, 40, and then this is 50?
50, yeah.
Okay, all right, so a nice, warm, or not warm, but cool kind of room for storing your apples.
We actually can keep it within a degree. I try to run it at 32 and a half. The compressors will turn on at 32 and a half and run it down to 31 and a half.
Wow.
And a degree makes a lot of difference in storage keeping, the life of the apple.
Can you say more about that?
Well, there's several things you fight in apples ripening. One is temperature. One is ethylene production, that the apple naturally puts off ethylene gas, which is one of the things I like to do is purge the room as often as I can and get rid of that ethylene gas. I put a fan in the door, blow it out, get fresh air in here. You try the best you can. Of course, there's smart freshing now, which is
Smart Freshing.
Smart Fresh is the name of the product and what they call it. And what it does is it takes one of the elements out of ethylene production. And I'm not chemist enough to tell you what it is. I've seen the diagram, but if you look it up, you can find it.
Okay.
And what that supposedly does, when everything works right, is it stops the apple from producing ethylene, which turns starches to sugar, which ripens the apple.
So it stops the ripening process.
Yes.
Interesting.
By gassing the room, and it's a gas they put in here. We don't do it, but a lot of the guys are using it. They can actually hold the apple for, I've heard, putting them in CA for up to years.
Whoa. Now, that all sounds good in the chemist world, and I'm sure chemists figures it out, and they're like, wee! Yeah. But in my mind, as a person who really likes a fresh tasting apple and a certain vitality of like a natural aging process, I wonder, is a consumer so dumbed down that they don't notice? I don't mean that in a mean way, but maybe I kind of do. Speaking to a lot of people, like we just don't know what we're getting anymore because the quality is so crappy.
Well, I think that's a lot of the food production in the world. It's become very scientific. It's not like
the bottom dollar too.
Exactly.
The bottom dollar. So
exactly.
Yeah.
No. Everything from genetically altered corn to bananas.
GMOs.
Yeah. And I guess we've become used to seeing fresh fruit on the store shelf year round.
It's true.
It wasn't too many years ago before they started shipping it in from the southern hemisphere that you had it as long as you could keep it in storage here in the north.
Wow, isn't that something?
Yeah.
So how long are you keeping your apples in here?
Well, so this room is a regular storage. The back room is a short-term one. This is a little longer term. And then over in this next room is actually a controlled atmosphere room. And what we do here is we're able to remove the oxygen out of the room.
All right.
So we're technically putting the apples to sleep. Well, it is. We run the oxygen around 3 and the carbon around 4. And it puts them in a coma.
So what does that mean?
Okay.
Putting them to sleep.
It's by not allowing them to have the oxygen, they can't go through that process of ripening.
Okay.
So it's a very delicate, too little oxygen, you end up with dead flesh on the apples. Too much oxygen, they ripen. But if you hold it right there at 3 and 4, the guys push the limits both ways, you keep them longer and everything. But those are good, safe, and you're just not allowing the apple to ripen.
And so with that in mind, what is your goal here for this room? You're putting them to sleep and not letting them ripen?
So that gives you a longer sales time.
Okay.
So you can load the back room. You know that you've got to have those out by Christmas. This room over here will last until February. This one, we packed as late as July out of this one. And the apples were still crisp.
Crisp, nice.
I will not say that they have the flavor of a fresh picked apple, but...
Appreciate your honesty in that.
But they are a good crisp apple when you take them out.
Yeah. So, food preservation, it's all part of it, whether you're pulling out that chemical property or you're coating it with or sucking out the oxygen.
Yep.
It's the end goal.
Is to keep the fruit as long as you can. It's no different than a crisper drawer in your refrigerator.
Right.
These frost-free refrigerators just suck the moisture right out of fruit.
That's
so they make a special drawer that keeps the moisture in.
Yeah.
But there again, you run into, if you try to keep apples in them very long, you end up with a buildup of ethylene. So people who keep them in those crisper drawers ought to take them out once in a while, just let them air, put them back in, you'll get a lot more life out of them.
Good tip for the refrigerator. Interesting. So this is about the same size room, a little bit smaller.
No, they're exactly the same.
Oh, they are exactly? Okay, got it. It's like the optical illusion.
Yeah, it is, because we're standing on the other side of it, I guess.
Yeah.
So actually, it's the same thing here, only it's got a double floor on it. There's a concrete floor poured with ethylene and then another concrete floor on top to make the airtight seal.
A concrete floor and then ethylene?
I mean, ethylene, excuse me, the sprayed on urethane.
Sprayed on urethane. Yeah, okay.
And then another floor. Everything's airtight in here when we seal it up.
Wow.
The doors are sealed. So I let whatever oxygen in we want and keep it at.
So what is the temperature that you do keep it at?
That we run a little warmer. It's around 36.
So was I right? 31?
32 over
32
there is what I aim
okay.
for. Once I break the seal on this and let oxygen, I drop the temperature right down to 32 on this one too.
Wow. Well, a lot of people now making cider, either they're kind of stuck doing it right then when the apples are all ready to come in, which is kind of ideal, but folks who are really doing higher production, they want to be able to do that all year round.
Right.
And so this is one of the ways, there are two different options to do it, really.
Yeah. Actually, I don't know whether you ever met the fellow who owns Artifact Cider. He actually would like Dave Shearer to run a CA room just for cider apples so that he can press into the summer and keep a steady supply coming all the way through.
Because that's where he's getting it.
That's where, yeah.
A CA room.
That's controlled atmosphere. That's what
Controlled
this room
atmosphere,
is.
CA,
Yeah.
I love it.
There's different ways, and a lot of the guys are using both the Smart Fresh and the CA. And I don't think we really know how long you can keep an apple by doing both of them.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Now, again, we're standing in this identical room here, and there's a lot of boxes here, and then I'm seeing around the corner there, I'm seeing a little press.
A little cider press, yeah.
Yeah, and...
it's one of the bladder presses that Orchard Equipment sells down in Conway.
Yep.
We had a big...
That's Orchard Equipment, that's...
Osco.
Osco, yeah. They're a big supplier. They ship around the world.
Right. Actually, a funny story. The reason they're in Conway, they were in Connecticut, and my mom and dad bought one of their first cider presses.
Whoa.
Went and got it and brought it up, and a couple weeks later, the Frenches drove up to see how it was running. And when they went by that building, and they said, what's going on there? So Dad and Mom took them down to the town of Conway, and they ended up buying it.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a great story.
Wow.
I love that.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to just turn this off for a little bit and then get my stuff, and we'll kind of take two. Look at that little Redfield apple.
I got the grass, like I told you, from Dave Shearer, the Science, and he said, I've never had an apple variety that grew as many apples consistently as a Redfield. He said they just, every year they set a heavy crop.
And they sure make a nice cider, too.
That's why he grows them.
Yeah. I know, talking to Field Maloney, I had him on the podcast. It was like episode 1, and we were talking about making cider with the Redfield apple, and he was saying it's kind of persnickety, though. So don't be fooled by it. It's a little persnickety, and he kind of got into it more. But I think it was his parents that brought over the original Scion from the Geneva. They went over there, Terry and Judith, and brought it back.
Yeah.
I love that. They're like the Johnny Appleseeds, the modern day.
Yeah.
I'd like to start from the beginning a little bit, because obviously you've been in this for a while.
My entire life.
Yeah. How would you describe your job title? How does your family and friends know you as?
That crazy guy that still keeps growing apples when he ought to give it up. Yeah. Mom and Dad started it in 1954. They both grew up on farms and that had apples and dairy cows. There happened to be an orchard up here that elderly man was getting ready to rent. So he stopped, saw Dad, and wanted to know if he wanted to rent it. Dad at that time was working construction, so he ran the apple orchard in between, mornings and nights. And Mom worked during the day on it. And then one of the other neighbors, the next year, wanted to know if he wanted to rent his apple orchard. So it kind of got into being a full-time occupation.
Wow.
And I've run it my entire life, I guess.
So you've been around apples for a long time.
Longer than I should have been. And peaches, we grow a lot of peaches and nectarines and all the stone fruits.
Yeah, peaches aren't easy to grow up here.
We're right on the northern limit of it.
Yeah.
We used to always figure if we could get them 4 out of 5 years, we were doing well up here.
4 out of 5 years.
Yeah. And they don't come in numerical order either, so. Sometimes you can lose them quite often.
Right. Interesting.
So, yeah, we kind of pieced together the farm. I'm still trying to add to it if I find something that helps.
So, go ahead.
Right now we've got I've cut a lot of the blocks down. We're getting out of the wholesale market as much as we can.
So what have you been doing exactly all these years? What were your folks doing, and then what did you kind of come in, and did you change any of that business model?
Yes. Ever since the 90s, once the Southern Hemisphere apples started coming in, imports from even other parts of the country, this area here grows a nice apple because of the hills and everything, but we're also, we don't have big orchards. They're small blocks, they're hard to take care of.
Because of the hills?
Because of the hills. If you can get 5 or 10 acres, that's a good sized block of apple trees for you.
Yeah.
Whereas other parts of the country, they can put in
swaths,
hundreds of acres.
Yeah.
So the maintenance is easier.
But they just don't have the same kind of variety of apples there at this point.
Right. I know. We in these hills up here grow a nice apple. It's a good hard apple.
Is that because of the soil?
Soil, altitude.
Mm-hmm. What does altitude have to do with growing apples?
You get a harder apple the higher up you get, until you get to a certain limit, and then it's too high for it.
Huh.
Right around 1,000 to 1,200 feet is nice.
Okay.
But the wholesale market is tougher for us because we can't grow that many apples,
Not the quantity.
The quantity, right. So we've cut back. I'm down to about 20 acres of apples, probably 3 of stone fruit, and then some berries and other stuff to use at our roadside stand.
Mm-hmm. And most of the apples that you've been growing, I imagine your folks are growing, were eating apples.
Yes, almost. When I was a kid, you grew a Macintosh. The rest of the varieties were pollinators for Macs, and if you picked them, okay. If you didn't, well, your money was in your Macintosh. And now the stores don't want Macintosh the way they used to. Of course, the hot craze for a long time has been Honeycrisp. A lot of guys went into it big. We probably didn't plant as many as we should have, looking back on it, but it looked like the market was going to get flooded.
It's like a poker game.
Oh yeah, and it's not like a vegetable that you throw in the spring and harvest. You're talking a long-term investment.
Yeah.
With the dwarf trees, they've shortened the time it takes to get a full crop off them, but it's still a major investment in getting them in the ground.
Absolutely. So most of the trees that you have, are they dwarf or are they standard size?
No, I have probably 3 standard trees left on the entire farm, and that's just just you got to
do what you got to do, right?
Well, I think it's more or less just I haven't gotten around to cutting them down yet and replacing them. Mainly, we're in semi-dwarfs, but lately I've been going to more dwarfing rootstock. Economics forces you can't really afford to pay somebody to climb very high for apples.
Yeah.
The more you can pick from the ground or a short way up, the better.
It's safe.
It's
safer. Yeah.
Yep. Dwarfing trees, of course, they control them by their root size, which makes them more sensitive to everything. They're more sensitive to drought, and they're just not as hardy a tree. Mm-hmm. The more you dwarf it, the weaker it is.
So what is the standard size of the dwarf trees that you're planting or have planted now?
Well,
does that vary?
That varies. Of course, every variety of apple has different vigor.
Yeah.
A northern spy will grow twice as big as a Honeycrisp on the same rootstock. So what I try to do is match up the ones with more vigor with more dwarfing rootstock to try to. What I'm aiming for is right around 10 to 12 feet height on my trees. Mm-hmm. When I was a kid, our ladders were all 24 feet long.
Wow.
Because, that's how you grew.
That's climbing up the side of a house.
Exactly. Well, A lot of times you went the first 10 feet before you hit an apple. The trees were 80 years old and planted 40 by 40. but that's production. Dad laughs about it. When the first semi-dwarf rootstocks came out, nobody trusted them. So they'd put in a standard in the normal 40, and then they'd put a semi-dwarf in between. And the idea was if the semi-dwarf didn't make it, they'd still have the standards. And if the semi-dwarf did, they'd cut the standard and put another semi-dwarf in its place. But nobody ever did. You just lived with what you did. So
yeah. Wow, you live and you learn.
Yeah.
I was wondering about the apple market all those years, how the price has fluctuated.
Well, I think of course, we're probably getting more per bushel, but the profit margin keeps shrinking. It's supply and demand.
Yeah.
If you're able to get as many apples as you want, you can pay less for them. Back 50 years ago, a lot of our apples, well, I remember as a kid, went down to Florida to Winn-Dixie because all the retirees...
Winn-Dixie, is that like the
chain store?
The chain
down.
store, that's
Yep.
I thought you meant, yeah?
Yeah, a lot of the people who had retired from New England and Michigan moved down, and they wanted a good hard Macintosh to eat down there in Florida. So
No kidding.
we'd ship them down. And
Just to Winn-Dixie.
well, that was one of the markets.
Wow.
Yeah. We actually shipped Macintosh around the world because we used to sell to J.P. Sullivan out of Air Mass. They were a big distributor.
Okay.
And they had a big market in the United Kingdom. And they also had that one down there in Winn-Dixie.
Wow.
So,
are you still shipping?
No,
That? No. So where is your market now?
it's in Boston at Chelsea Marketplace.
Okay,
down there.
yeah.
I have a wholesaler
Very nice.
down there that handles my apples.
Nice.
But there again, I'm competing with a lot of bigger growers. I don't have the land. I don't have the means to grow an apple as cheap as they can.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it would seem like with the growing interest in apple, and certainly I think cider is kind of the apple's best friend right now. Although the orchardists like yourself, you're looking at, well, what do I do now? There's this are the orchardists convinced, or somebody like yourself convinced enough that, hell yeah, I'm going to start planting cider apples?
There, I got them ready to go.
I know you got them right out there. When did that kind of shift for you?
Well, probably in the last 10 years, I've noticed I've had people calling from all around looking whether I had any Baldwin apples. Now, we used to grow a lot of Baldwin apples, but we cut them all down because you couldn't sell them. Or they wanted to know whether I had any of the odd varieties at all. And being a little slow, it took me a while, but it finally dawned on me, well, people are calling looking for them. Maybe I better grow them. And it's a new niche that hopefully will work out.
Yeah.
And you have to have it. You're either going to find something like that or you're not going to survive in today's market.
You got to keep on being flexible. Well, in any business, of course.
Any business.
Why would it be any different here?
Yep.
So I want to go back to just the growing of the apples, because when I met you, you were talking about the grafting and the different rootstock, and I like to understand more about that, because there's the dwarf sizes and different, people say M1118 or all that. What does that stand for? And how do you figure that out? Because a lot of the folks that are listening to this will be cider makers, maybe wanting to plant a larger orchard. But there are a lot of folks just like myself who want to have a dandy little, small orchard in their yard and are always on the lookout for that kind of wiggy little variety.
Right.
So what do you look for?
Well, let's start right at the beginning. The whole idea behind grafting is to take the variety you want and put it on the rootstock you want. And as we were talking, the vigor of the variety contributes also to the size of the tree. So there's a lot of information out there. People go on. You talked about the the mauling rootstocks, and they go the 9s up to the 26s to the 7s to the 111s, the 118s, each one getting gradually bigger.
And what does that mean?
Well, they normally tell you a percentage, like a 26, they'll tell you 30 to 40%, and that's the size of a standard tree. So it gets to be, if you put a Macintosh on a standard tree and one on a 26, it would be 30 to 40% the size of the standard one.
Oh, okay.
Whereas a 118 or a 111 are going to be 60 to 70% the size. So they're going to be almost as big. So
what it doesn't really correlate to the 18 being 18%. Are those numbers just like what the scientists picked out?
I think somebody grabbed in a hat and grabbed the number and started with it.
It would have helped if they did that a little bit differently.
Well, that's
from my mind.
Right now, I'm actually switching over to a lot of the Geneva rootstocks.
Geneva rootstock, that it came out of Geneva?
Yes, Geneva. Okay. And Cummings, I think, was the guy's name who did a lot of the research there. He wanted a rootstock that was more resistant to fire blight, which is becoming an issue to orchards around.
So let's talk first about fire blight and exactly what that is.
It's a bacteria, and it attacks the cell walls of the tree, and it will kill a tree. Everybody's lost. Matter of fact, I've heard horror stories where guys have lost a third or half of their apple trees in 1 year.
What does it look like on a tree initially?
Well,
how does it progress?
It'll start on the tips, and you'll see the leaf begin to curl, and it'll just run right down the thing and right towards the trunk. And we have some sprays that we can use, some of the streptomycins. I try to do a good copper spray in dormancy just to get rid of any of the fire blight knockout that I can, but it's still there.
It's a big problem.
It's a big problem. And some varieties are more sensitive than others. Some rootstocks are more sensitive than others. So by switching to the Geneva ones, I'm hoping to get away with some of those problems. May not cure it totally, but you use every arrow in your quiver that you can.
Well said. Yeah.
So getting back to the Geneva rootstocks, they're a whole new set of numbers which don't correlate to anything other than you have to look them up and know what they are.
Yeah.
The ones I've got out here in the buckets are mainly 41, Geneva 41, and also Geneva 935, and they'll be 30 to 40% of a standard tree.
Okay.
So like I said, by matching the variety to the rootstock, I'm hoping to keep them around 10 to 12 feet tall.
Which is a doable size.
A doable height.
Yeah.
That's not a bad height to work with.
Yeah. So the type of graft that you're doing onto that rootstock, what's the name of that graft?
Most of those are bench grafted. I like to start with the bench grafting because I can do it in March when I have a little spare time. If we've got a lousy day, it's nice to come in here when it's snowing and raining out and work for a few hours bench grafting. Plus, by doing it that early, it gives me a second shot at regrafting anything that didn't take, because I can bud graft this time of year. Last year I had, I think, 15 or 20 that didn't take, so a week or so ago I bud grafted them.
How are they doing?
They look good so far. I'll tell you better next spring.
Yeah.
That's bench grafting. Of course, you do it when they're dormant, and it's almost an immediate response to them. Where bud grafting, it'll be pretty much next spring, before I know they're going to take or not.
So with that graft, what are I've used a couple different, I don't know, the putty, and then there's the really, really sticky stuff, and that's what I've actually been using, that's super sticky.
Yeah. Is it a wax that you're using?
I guess I got it from Conway, Oesco. And folks say, well, and talking to Sue Chadwick, she said, well, that's really the better stuff to use versus the stuff that doesn't really quite stick to your hand. But I'll tell you, that's a bugger to work with.
Yeah, no, that wax, put a little Vaseline on your hand
and that helps. Well, in hindsight. I actually, for bench grafting, I use, it's a stretchy tape, plastic tape. Yeah, clear.
And,
white.
When I first started bench grafting more years ago than I'd like to admit to, it used to look like masking tape. And you really had to wax over that because it would dry out. Grafting, the secret to grafting is lining up the cambium layers, getting it airtight so it doesn't dry out. And if you do those two things, they almost always take.
Isn't it also a little bit of timing too?
Well, timing on, yes.
The scion, I mean, folks are, shooting up to Maine we're in Massachusetts right now, shooting up to Maine to like a Super Chili Farm with John Bunker and that team up there, and then bringing it down, and they might not be grafting it for like a week or two later.
And that's the other secret. I've had people give me scion wood, and they let it dry out a little bit. If it dries out, it won't take either. You've got to. I like to keep it wrapped in wet newspaper and keep it in a cooler with an ice block in there. Keep it moist all the time.
Spray it. Yeah, spray wet the newspaper.
Wet the newspaper. Yeah. They don't want to be in standing water, but keep it moist all the time.
Yeah.
And if I've got a choice, I'll go out and cut it fresh and use it right then.
Yeah.
I'll cut what I'm going to use in the morning, then go back after lunch and cut a new batch. I think it makes a big difference.
Yeah. So you're using that nice, because that's the tape that I use right now too. You're using that same kind of like really sticky, resiny with a.
No, well, let me get my grafting box out.
Yeah, I'll be kind of curious. I always like these little tips because, to tell you the truth, I just did my first graft this year after visiting Lou and Sue.
Yeah.
And I can't believe it, but some of them took.
Good.
Which I felt like I had a lot of good luck there.
Well, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good.
That's true. Yeah.
That's the tool I use.
Okay, yeah, I've seen that. That's, again, from OSCO.
Yeah.
And that...
You just...
I'm going to get a photo of that, too.
Okay. It makes a U-cut in the wood. If I had a stick of wood, well, you've done it.
Right. I'm just using a knife because I do the rind graft, and I just kind of like sliver it off on either side, and that seems to do it pretty well for me.
Yep. The big thing about bench grafting is, like I said, matching up the cambium layers. So if you got the same size scion that you're using on the rootstock, I'll look through a dozen of them to find one that, and if it's not
size.
Close, I'll go find another one.
Yeah.
Because if they don't match up really good, they're not going to take.
You're not going to get it. Yeah. Well, it seems like it's an easy jigsaw puzzle to do, but
right.
It's always something new there.
Is it the tape you use?
Yep, that's exactly the tape I use. Let me just put down this little microphone here. See if I can find my.
The secret to that tape is you can almost feel it stretch.
Yes.
You want to.
Yeah.
And you get that stretch to it all the time, and it'll make a nice tight seal.
It kind of all reminds me a little bit like beekeeping a bit too. You have to like be in a certain meditative form to do this work. You can't just be.
No, it's not production. You have to.
Yeah. Really think about it.
Yeah.
Now the focus. All right, there we are. That's a great little tool.
Yeah.
Especially if you're doing high production.
Yeah. Somewhere in here I've got. There's Dad's graft and stuff right there. That's what he used.
Oh, no
He did
kidding.
a lot of scion grafting. I don't even want to know how
kidding.
old that stuff is. Probably something his dad gave him.
I'm going to just move this back here, get a little bit of light here. Wow, so that's a little wooden.
Yeah, that was
Put that against a...
And then something, I don't know whether they made it.
That's a cool little tool. That
What you
was
do is-
definitely...
To scion graft, you put that on top of the stump, you give it a wrap, you turn it around, put that in the middle and wrap it, and it holds it open. You put your scions in and take it out.
Wow.
So...
That's a nice all-in-one tool.
Yeah, I would say that's handmade looking at it.
I would totally say that's handmade.
So...
Yeah.
No, we've come a ways since...
We have come a ways,
Although I
but
still scion graft. I still
bet you
use
do,
it.
yeah.
But if I'm top grafting trees, I like to bark graft more than I do scion graft. I can do it quicker, and I think I get a better rate.
Great, very cool. And you have a nice little metal box here with all the rest of your tools, little hammers and...
There's the wax.
Yeah, nice.
So
Yeah, got to keep it all together because you're
when
come that season. You don't want to be running around like chicken with your head cut off.
Well, even with the box, that's not a guarantee.
It happens, right?
That's right.
So you're you're doing the orchard planting and all that, you must be doing the pruning too.
Yes, we do all our own. I do all the pruning, yeah.
So I'd like to, I don't know if it's kind of easy to talk to you a little bit about pruning, standing inside a building.
Well,
but I'm kind of curious about that.
Well, I think there's some basics to pruning, and after that, it's more art than science, because no two people prune the same. I mean, I learned from my father, yet we could be in the same tree, and he'd say, well, aren't you going to cut that? And I'd say, no, but aren't you going to cut that? There's main things. You're looking for good crotch angles.
The people would say you would want to like throw a cow through it. That's how they used to.
Yeah.
Large enough, an opening in the tree to have a cow go through it. But now that's kind of changed.
Well, it has. And you're just looking for good light penetration to get in, because light is so crucial to growing apples. These new plantings that they're doing on the wires, the high density,
like a spalia.
Yes.
Like a flat
right.
wire.
They're looking for 80 to 90% light penetration down in on that tree.
Yeah.
Because you can't grow apples without light; they just won't grow in the dark. Which is why on a tree, if you get that big canopy, that's where you're going to grow your apples. And then the rest is just going to be wood in there.
Well, there's some trees that you see where folks are almost making it like a crew cut top.
Mm-hmm. I've done that.
Yeah.
They call that an open vase. And I think it makes it easier. You've got that whole surface. It's all there to grow on. Instead of using the central leader system, what I normally do is as a tree grows, I grow a central leader system. And then at some point I may decide to make it a modified one and trim the two laterals and keep it to a certain height if they're going to grow too tall. And then as it gets even larger and I start losing that light penetration, I'm apt to go to an open center and make a big cut right in the center.
Right in the center. So you're cutting down into that notch a little bit.
Yeah, I'm cutting right at the laterals that I want to keep on a flat there.
Yeah.
And I may grow another central leader to start to get fresh wood up in there. Or I may, depending on the variety, keep it as an open center. I found McCowans, I can do a nice job growing them on an open center because they're a spur type and they like to grow on that upright wood.
Interesting. Now, someone like myself, I have a couple of apple trees that might be volunteers. I have a kind of an old homestead, basically. And so I've been slowly discovering both on my side of the road and my neighbor's side of the road that there's some hidden apple trees.
Yep.
And they could be any age, because they just might have been sitting dormant there, and they're not really big. And now they're starting to get some light, and because I've been clearing out and they're getting happy. But how do you approach like an old tree? Because I know a lot of listeners have these trees are like, oh, I just bought a house and there's an apple tree and it's just been going crazy for years.
Well, I think you got the right idea. The first thing is to open up the woods around them and get sunlight in there. The first year, I wouldn't even trim them after I did that because it's going to be quite a shock to the tree all of a sudden to go from the shade to sunlight. After that, I do it in stages, over a 3-year period. Make a few cuts, let a little light down in there, see if you can get some regrowth down in, because most of them look like a mushroom. They just grow that top and everything shades out underneath. Sometimes you can get some new growth down in there. Sometimes you can't.
Okay. So do you want, if you're getting a lot of, just on my drive here today, I looked at this one apple tree and I'm thinking, dang, I really want to trim that apple out. So we're getting like a lower sucker that's coming out. Mm-hmm. I would keep that there and kind of foster it along. You
can. That's actually a good way to start a whole new central leader.
Yeah.
If you've got a limb coming off from the trunk and you get a nice sucker growing up, that can be your whole tree right there.
Right there. As the crown, some of the crown ones are kind of dying back just because it's been neglected and there's been vines. So cutting that back is a good way to go.
Yeah. Let some light penetrate down in there, see what you got, and work from that. Every tree is different. You kind of have to step back and take a look at it and say, well, this is what we've got to work with.
Right, they have a personality of their own.
Everyone does.
I love that.
There's no science to it, really.
Yeah.
I mean, there's the basics. You try to get rid of the bad angle crotches. You try to let light down in. You've got to be able to get a ladder in there for people. Containment, if you're planting, and trying to get through to mow and spray and stuff, you've got to contain them back a little bit.
So contain it, like if they're kind of hanging way over, it could be a little hard to mow them. So do you cut that and trim it out so you could walk underneath it?
Well, not so you can walk underneath it, but so that into it, so I can get the machinery through.
All right.
A lot of times, what you'll notice is once the branch starts hanging down, a new one will sprout.
Yes.
And you can either, make a few cuts, or you can take it right off at that sprout, and that'll be your new limb.
And let it go there. Yeah.
But every variety is different. I trim a McCowan different than I do a tip bearer like a Cortland. McCowans, you can hold them back a little more. Cortlands, you've got to have that fruit growing right at the end of their growth, so you have to trim them differently.
And are you seeing anything with those cider varieties? Because the McCowan and the Cortland aren't necessarily cider varieties in my mind.
Too early to tell on the cider variety. Some of them I know, Northern Spies and the Greenings we've had for years. I know how to control them. Some of the other ones that I'm just starting with, that'll be a learning curve that I'll just have to figure out. Yeah.
Now, how about just maintenance over the course of the year for nutrients and all that? They say like a cider apple, you really want kind of low nutrient.
Right.
So do you just...
I think even on a cider variety, though, you've got to deal with tree health. Any plant or tree, you've got to get it as healthy as you can to not only produce the fruit, but also fight off diseases and insects and everything else.
Are you doing integrated pest management? Or
we've done that for years. Nobody wants to spend any more on spray material than they absolutely have
or
to.
Or
the time. So every corner you can cut, yes, you do.
Yeah.
My block of cider apples that I put in, like I said, will be mainly for tree health that I do. It won't have anything to do with cosmetics. So in other words, like right now I'm worried about sooty blotch on my apples and fly specks, which is just a fungus that
grows on the actual apple itself.
And it doesn't hurt it, but it just doesn't look good enough, so we have to throw it out. So I have to spray for that. My cider varieties,
you don't have to worry
about it.
Yeah.
No.
It's kind of a nice low maintenance for an orchardist.
Well, it is. It'll be quite a bit lower, But I want to make sure the trees are as healthy as I possibly can get them. We've gone to, in the last few years, more and more into foliar nutrients, especially after last year. The fertilizer I put out just stayed there. We never had any rain all summer.
Yeah.
Trees were stressed, but they were able to absorb the foliar nutrients that I gave them. And this year, I went even more, a more in-depth plan. I sat down with my fertilizer salesman, and she went through the whole thing, and we set up a program. We do soil and leaf analysis. Well, we do soil every year and leaf every third year about. So
and you're sending that out to a lab?
It goes down to UMass, tested, and then I get the results back, and we can look, and it may tell me my potassium's low, or it may tell me my lime is low. Things like that. We try to make it ideal for the tree. Whatever it needs, it has. So
nice. Yeah, that's a good tip if you have a local university.
I think that's money well spent. Anybody trying to grow any amount of apples. Tree health, it's going to only help your tree that much more.
So get your soil tested.
Yep.
And do a leaf test. And what time of year do you do leaf tests?
Leaf test you normally do, well, it's just about this time of year, about the 1st of August. And that lets you know not what's in the soil, but what the tree's able to get. Because so many of the nutrients that can be in the soil, but if for some reason there's something out of balance, the tree can't take it up. And so you can be putting fertilizer down, but if your lime's off, it's not able to use those.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
And I think even for cider varieties, you want that tree healthy.
Absolutely. So, you want to have that fruit as much as possible. Have a good concentration of the sugar. Yeah. Big thing there. Neat. Well, that's a lot of good information for all of us to kind of sit on and muster through. It's so exciting what you're doing here. And I think what's really exciting is that you've been doing this as part of your family's trade, Scott's Farm. Really this wealth of knowledge that you have is just, it's just invaluable. And I thank you for being that kind of like steward of the apple trees for all these years.
I always say my dad always forgot more about growing apples than I'll probably ever know, but he did pass some of it along to me. So,
well, why don't we give your dad's full name and your mom's full name?
It was Edward and Janice Scott, and they grew up in Asheville and moved here to Buckland, or actually they lived in Asheville and just had the farm in Buckland.
Nice. Wow.
So,
that's a good ancestry there. It's really what it's all about in these hill towns is kind of passing that along. And with so many new folks coming in and the excitement around cider, I'm wondering if you are open to folks contacting you as they're coming up. And
any questions I'll try to answer. The extension service probably can give you a more, but sometimes it's not bad to go to somebody who's done it instead of just researched it.
Absolutely. Nothing like that. You can't grow corn out of a book, is what I like to say. You got to put it in the ground and then start talking.
That's another piece of wisdom my father told me years ago. He says, listen to what they say, but make your own decision, because he says they get a paycheck every 2 weeks. You don't. So it's still your final decision, no matter what the extension service tells you.
That's right. Absolutely. Well, this is wonderful. I so appreciate your time talking to us.
No problem. I'm glad to talk with you. It's always good to find somebody who's enthusiastic about it.
Find out how you can contact Colin Scott of EJ Orchard in Buckland, Massachusetts by going to the show notes for this here episode 364 at ciderchat.com. Don't miss another episode of Cider Chat. Make sure to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you are listening to your podcast episodes. And if you'd like to get behind-the-scene news or upcoming reports of Totally Cider tours, make sure to check out the eCider News, which you could sign up at ciderchat.com. And with that, I leave you here. This is Rio Wind Caller signing off for now. Looking forward to seeing you in Ciderville.
Strange apples, bitter sharp. Strange apples, juicy and ripe. Bop, 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 ba-da-doo-doo-da, bop, bop. Bop, ba-da-doo-doo-da. Who wants a tannenbaum?
I want a tannenbaum.
Who wants to pull them down?
I'm gonna pull them down. Hey, 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 apples, bittersweet.
Strange apples, hanging high. Got them strange apples. Forget the pie. Strange apples, squeeze them tight. Got them strange apples. Strange apples. Strange apples. Make them pop. Pop, 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 ba-da-doo-doo-da, pop, 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 ba-da-doo-doo-da.
Who wants a tannenbaum?
I want a tannenbaum.
Who wants to pull them down?
I'm gonna pull them down. Hey, 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 apples.
Come and see. Plenty strange apples for you and me. Strange ba-da-doo-doo-da, pop, 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 ba-da-doo-doo-da, pop, 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 ba-da-doo-doo-da, pop, 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 pop.
Yeehaw!